Welcome back, comrades. This is Gaming with Austin, and today we are on episode 115 of Season 2 of the Utopian Community series. What we're gonna do is we're gonna finish paving the pathway. Once it's all finished up, I'd go towards continuing on with the remaining floors. I know some of you might not know this, but I went to the Strawberry Festival. Sadly, it was cut short because of thunderstorm. Donnerstorm. That means thunderstorm in German. Donnerstorm. 4-5. Donnerstorm. Then I went to a local candy shop. Some of my favorite candies include one of my favorite candies to consume, Sour Patch Kids. Another one, Jolly Ranchers. One of the rare treats I would get would be those giant lollipops, aka Whirly Pops. I was able to chomp down the entire thing in like half an hour. It starts off really hard, but then it'll get easier to crush down. Especially with permanent teeth. But I wouldn't eat garbage or anything. I call a carnivore diet disgusting. This is just my personal opinion. A vegan diet tends to be better at removing visceral fat than the keto diet. Because your body needs to store some of your energy as fat. Because if it can't store energy as fat, you're fucked. Your body fat can help suppress your appetite, especially subcutaneous fat, because of a hormone called leptin. People with Prader-Willi syndrome produce too much ghrelin at any given moment. Most of it is produced by your stomach. The reason why your stomach produces so much ghrelin, and if you have Prader-Willi syndrome, is that your hypothalamus produces a hormone that too much of a hormone that causes your stomach to produce ghrelin. Not only that, the same part of the brain that controls hunger also takes control of our behavior. Very little is known. It's a pretty rare disease. If patients are left to their own devices, they'd literally eat themselves to death. If they're left to their own devices. So the household they live in, their food has to be locked up at all times. Not only to protect other family members from becoming malnourished because of the patient's insatiable appetite, but for the greater good of the patient too. It's part of a strict diet program. That insatiable appetite, if left to their own devices, can cause an early death. Unfortunately, it can cause an early death. Not only they never feel full, they are hungry all the time. They feel hungry all the time because of a damaged hypothalamus. In a pretty cruel twist of irony, they really don't need much food at all. In a pretty cruel twist of irony, because of something called hypotonia. Which means low muscle tone. Back in the day, if a child had Prader-Willi syndrome back then, they didn't even know the disorder caused them to be overweight in the first place. Until genetic testing became possible. Until genetic testing became possible. Then, nowadays, it can now be detected before birth. Which gives parents a sigh of relief, which means they are more prepared for when their child starts to develop the insatiable appetite. The parent knows what to do. Then the parent would know what to do when their child develops the insatiable appetite. That most often, which is what Prader-Willi syndrome is most often notable for, which is its most notable symptom. the insatiable appetite, is what defines PWS the most. Not only are they known to steal food from the... Not only are they known to scavenge from the garbage bins, if left to their own devices, they're going to shoplift. They are known to, patients with PWS are also known to shoplift to fuel their to try to satisfy their insatiable appetite. They don't just scavenge the garbage bins and the dumpsters for food. Some of them end up shoplifting. Just to try to satisfy their hunger. Some of them end up eating pet food. Some of them have been known to eat pet food, which is kind of unnatural for humans. We humans know better, mostly know better than to eat pet food. But those with PWS, they don't care if the food is fresh or not. As long as it's edible, they would eat anything. They're trying to satisfy an appetite they cannot, something they cannot satisfy. Not only they never feel full, but they're hungry all the time. But they feel hungry all the time. What causes their temper tantrums? It's mostly due to their insatiable appetite. One case of it was known in mystery diagnoses. Like, there's a man named Connor Hayback. Like, when he was diagnosed with Prader-Willi syndrome, he was morbidly obese. But then, he was put on a strict diet by the doctor. They're trying to satisfy an appetite they cannot that they cannot satisfy. You don't grow out of Prader-Willi syndrome, as it is a genetic disorder. When genetic testing for a new generation of patients with Prader-Willi syndrome, thanks to genetic testing, parents are more likely to be prepared for it. For when their insatiable appetite kicks in. Usually, it would kick in at about 2 to 3 years old. It is caused by damage to chromosome 15. If your child has been diagnosed with Prader-Willi syndrome, you may want to think about locking up all sources of food. Basically learn how to weld. Because welding tends to have a stronger bond than screwing. Some patients with Prader-Willi syndrome end up shoplifting. They will end up shoplifting. Out of 15 million people, 10 to 15 million about 1,000 of those would have Prader-Willi syndrome. That's how rare the condition is. Which means parents of kids with Prader-Willi syndrome, like if your child is under 3 years old, you may want to think about preparing yourself for when their insatiable appetite kicks in. But when their insatiable appetite, before their insatiable appetite begins to kick in, you may want to think about locking up all the food sources. Only giving it to them at certain times. I learned that in a documentary. And for the whole community, they should lock up garbage bins. And I believe that food should only be sold behind the counter in case some of those people have Prader-Willi syndrome. You cannot treat Prader-Willi syndrome in on itself, but you can only treat the symptoms. And Connor Hayback's not the only one with Prader-Willi syndrome. One of the most defining features of Prader-Willi syndrome is morbid obesity. If Prader-Willi syndrome was more common than we think, we'd have to be even more prepared. Gotta be even more prepared. Because locking up their food can actually save their life. When you lock up their food, you can actually save their life. Not just your life, but their life too. And Connor Hayback was subject to a documentary series called Mystery Diagnosis. One of those conditions involved is Prader-Willi syndrome, and the documentary series is Prader-Willi syndrome. it's not the only disease out there. On Mystery Diagnoses, it talks about a lot of rare diseases. They don't just talk about Prader-Willi syndrome. They talk about other conditions too, like fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, which basically means your muscle turns into bone. Which will ultimately obstruct your breathing, which is why it's almost invariably fatal. There's another one called Hermannsey-Putlack syndrome, which one of the signs is albinism. And another one is bloody diarrhea. Similar to Crohn's disease. There's another one called Schwartzman-Diamond syndrome, which not only causes anemia, but also immunodeficiency. And underdeveloped baby. And it'll cause babies to be small for their birth length and for their gestational age. For their gestational age. Gestation refers to the amount of time you've been pregnant. Gestational age refers to how long you've been pregnant with a baby. Full term is at least 37 to 42 weeks gestation. Post term is 42 weeks. Premature means less than 37 weeks. Which means some premature births cannot be prevented. There are some risk factors too. Some risk factors you cannot control. There are some complications to preterm birth. That'll put your child at risk later in life. Like CP, cerebral palsy. If your child has CP, medical marijuana can help them a lot. Physical therapy only works to a certain point in people with CP. If it's like really bad, like you cannot move your arms at all, nor can you move your legs, then it's not going to work. As for a case of one of my grandma's former neighbors, whose child ultimately ended up dying from complications of cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy. Which, by the way, it's not the only complication of preterm birth. Some other complications include respiratory distress syndrome in infancy. which is what killed one of JFK's children. Respiratory distress. Infantile respiratory distress syndrome. Formerly known as hyaline membrane disease. And sadly, some infants end up dying as a result of it, despite the fact that we have modern medicine now. Due to how severe it is at the time of birth. Because the prognosis is determined by how underdeveloped their lungs are. If they're severely underdeveloped, their chance of dying increases. Thankfully, most premature babies survive to adulthood. Thanks to modern medicine and modern medical practices. But there's another medical condition that is a silent killer to infants. It's called sudden infant death syndrome, which means the sudden unexplained death of someone, a person under the age of 1. The juvenile variant is called sudden unexplained death in childhood. The adult version of it is called sudden unexpected death syndrome, which can actually, if we want to reduce cases of something like that, we need to impose laws that make genetic testing mandatory. Like for heart rhythm disorders like Brugada syndrome. Because, Brugada syndrome can cause deaths like that in undiagnosed patients. If you want to the best thing you can do if you want to have children is to opt for genetic testing, because that can save their life and prevent sudden unexplained death syndrome in cases of Brugada syndrome. It's not the only heart rhythm disorder out there. There's also hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which is what caused the death of Benjamin Breedlove back in 2011. They have one thing in common. It is something you are born with. It's an inborn heart disorder. They're both inborn heart disease. The timer went off. Once I get this part done, it'll be it for this video. But before I go, be sure to subscribe to my channel if you love my content. Be sure to click the like button if you like my content. Dislike button if you don't like my content. Subscribe if you love my content. Click on the bell icon if you really love my content. Follow me on Instagram for more content like this. As always, thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more. And last but not least, peace out. Won't you run forever? I'm your turbo lover.